Hello metals 2 and 3. Today I'm going to be showing you how to cast pewter into the mold of the found object that you made for the handle. So one thing I want to point out, you may not be able to see it right now, but I actually ended up this morning, right before I did this, cutting some more keys down the side down here, which is what I should have done yesterday just because it's a lot easier to open up the mold as opposed to the cuts here. But sometimes when you're on video, you're just so focused on making the video that you're not thinking logically. So as you can see, I've also got some rubber bands wrapped around here to help hold the mold together. And then I'm also going to, off camera, before I do this, just wrap my mold up in some duct tape too. That way, even if you've got a good solid fit with your keys, sometimes you do get pewter that leaks out from the side. So this way, just by wrapping it up with duct tape, it'll ensure that the mold holds together. So something else I've got here, I've got this ladle. It's better if you have a steel pot, but this is what I've got to work with. Here are my giant ingots of pewter. I'm probably not gonna need this much, but I figured I'd melt more than I need. And then I have this handy ingot mold too. So once I pour the pewter in here, if I've got any leftover molten pewter in the ladle, I'm not just gonna let it sit and cool in there. I'll pour it into that pewter mold. And then finally, I'm gonna be using my acetylene Smith torch. I'm using a larger torch than when I was fusing because I just wanna be able to melt the pewter down. And another thing that's good to have that I don't really have right now, I'm gonna try to make it work with this chisel that I used for pewter, but sometimes when you melt down pewter, especially if you're melting down ingots that you've already cast before, there might be some sort of like dirt, built up in there, and as you melt it, you'll see it'll all float to the top, so you'll have this kind of like dirty scum on top. So if you've got a spoon that you're not using, or like a metal putty knife, that's good too, to just like skim the stuff off the top, and then I'll just tap it off on my pewter only soldering brick. So I'm gonna tape this up off camera, and then I'll come back and we'll be ready to cast. All right, so this is all taped up. I'm ready to cast now. I'm just gonna move this over a bit, leave this upright. And now I'll light my torch. Oh, geez. So that was exciting, huh? It's probably easier to pour if you've got something with an actual like pouring edge on it. And also I like to use a steel pot because obviously it has more space to contain the pewter, but we'll see how that went. I can't tell if it went all the way through my mold possibly, or I just spilled a ton of it. So we'll just wait for this to cool and see how it looks. This stuff that got on the countertop, it's not a huge deal. It really just like, it'll just come off, and you can see it's already pretty solid, but it's very hot, so I'm not gonna touch it right now. So I cooled my piece off. Here's how my casting turned out. So you can see these little bits of flashing. It's because it leaked out of the mold. So that's why I like to wrap it up with duct tape. This came out all right. The only thing is I had noticed after I poured this that it looked like I didn't have this balancing perfectly. So one end was up. So that's why this end right here, you can see it didn't flow all the way because of gravity. You know, the metal can't fill up there. So I'm just gonna wrap up my mold again. You can see that I cleaned off all of this flashing. I just used a chisel and literally just scraped it off the surface, so it's really easy. And then you can see I've got some kiln or soldering bricks in there. That's not a huge deal if you can't get it out. When I go to melt down this flashing, I can just skim it off of the top. So I'm gonna get this set up and pour another mold. That's the nice thing about pewter, is you can just keep reusing it and reusing it. Okay, so we are ready for round 2. So I'm just melting down that kind of reject casting I got, and then this is the ingot I poured from what was left over, and this is just some flashing that was on my mold. I'm not pouring, like last time I poured 2 huge ingots, and that was definitely way more metal than I needed for this, so this should be enough to get my mold all nice and cast, and then I just want to make sure that this is balancing pretty well. Okay, I think that looks even. All right, round 2. Having a pot better, but just gonna, will you hold the handle while I set up like this under? Thanks. And, okay, that should be good, thank you. Now I'm gonna skim that like dirtiness off of the top. You get a lot of that, especially like once you've been casting it over and over again, you know, it's just kind of crud. So it's better if you've got like a spoon or a little metal spatula. Okay, here we go. There we go. This is going a lot better than before. Oh, I got a leak. Uh-oh, I think that went all the way through. Oh well, so I'll just have to do another pour, but it's not the end of the world. You can just keep doing it over and over again. fourth time's a charm. So I just had to pour this, another time, and it finally came out. So now I'll just do some cleanup. I think that I had such difficulty getting a good cast with this because every time I poured in here, my mold would sort of rock back and forth, so it was kind of weird. So I ended up just using a lot of tape to help and rubber bands to hold my mold together, and then also a brick to hold everything in place. And of course I didn't record my successful pour, but I really just did the same thing that I had done in the previous ones. So here's my little hammerhead. So any areas where it seems like I have a lot of pitting, like right here I have a big gap, I can actually just take a little bit of pewter and fill it in there. Just the same principle as when I was filling the space between my cylinder to fuse that together. And then otherwise, I'm just gonna clean this up a little bit with a pewter file, and then I'll probably sand it. But pewter actually, it scratches very, very easily. So I've never had much luck polishing it or even taking it to a high grit sandpaper finish. So what I'll do is I'll probably file it, and then I usually like to leave a rougher sanding finish on pewter. So I'll probably just sand it with some 60 grit sandpaper and be happy with that. And then I'll be ready to solder my little hammer handle onto my mug once I've got my mug formed completely with the base soldered onto it. So that will be next time.